Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the FTX Crypto Cup in Miami, part of the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour. Today is the second round, and today we will learn why you don't trash talk Magnus Carlsen. Did you like the thumbnail, by the way? It was the Michael Jordan meme. You know what I'm talking about? And I took that personally, because Michael Jordan took everything personally. Some of you obviously know what I'm talking about. Some of you have no idea. So some of you see that thumbnail, you're like, I don't get it. But that's where that's from, in case I have to explain it to you. You know, it's not very fun explaining a joke, but in case you were confused why Magnus took something personally. Now, I don't truly think that what happened today was trash talk, but it was still an incredible and interesting storyline. I'm going to show you, I think, 7 games of action today, different than the 13 games I was showing you during the Olympiad. The first matchup is between Anish Giri and Praggnanandhaa Rameshbabu. Praggnanandhaa apparently doesn't get a last name in this event. They just removed, or I guess technically, yeah, Rameshbabu, he doesn't get a last name, but he's Praggnanandhaa. Although he should be Praggnanandhaa R. All right, we should definitely have the R in there. This was their 4th game. So remember, it's 4 games of rapid. This was after 3 games already. The winner of this game takes it home, gets the 3 points, gets the $7,500. We have a Nimso, and Anish plays just a very standard line. A3 here, bishop takes, black takes on c4 and plays the move c5, counterattacking the center. A few moves later, that pawn does in fact trade into the center. And we just have a very stable position, right? Black is trying to trade off this bishop, because if this bishop were to get traded, this bishop is a little bit stupid, right? It's a little hard to get that bishop into the game. You have to try to play for an expansion in the middle. But you'll notice that Pragg is not rushing. I mean, he plays queen b7, and the whole point of queen b7 is to open up the c file, to sidestep rook c1 bad intentions, and to defend the bishop. In case this happens, you can actually play the move queen a6. The queen is actually very comfortable on that square. So very balanced game from the opening. He does in fact end up trading, develops his knight, and as I just mentioned, Anish expands in the center of the board. Both sides are just making general improving moves. b5 is an interesting idea to try to play a6, then knight b6, and maybe knight a4 or knight c4, creating a potential outpost for his knight. We see Pragg playing h6, again, just generally useful moves. Knight h2, a step backwards by Anish, potentially preparing an f-pawn, potentially preparing knight g4 and bad intentions to checkmate Pragg. Pragg attacks on the queen side with b4, and now Pragg has a passed a-pawn, so that a-pawn could potentially be an asset in the endgame, also could be a liability. Look at this move. Anish plays rook d3 with the intention of playing rook here, and gets absolutely smashed. Rook c2 is an amazing move from Pragg. And the point is that if you take, it's not mate, but you're going to lose the e4 pawn, and then you're in very bad shape here. Rook c2 is an amazing move. Bishop a3, though, danger levels, and we have a trade. But at the end of the day, a pawn falls. And I just mentioned a couple of moves ago, like, what happens if you lose the a-pawn, right? I mean, if the a-pawn survives. Is it asset, liability? Pragg gives it up, but of course has the d-pawn, right? He now has a pawn over here. Now, black is a pawn up. Is black winning? I don't know. I mean, the eval bar says one thing, but is black really winning? A bishop is usually better than the knight in the endgame. So Pragg begins to consolidate, and I mean, everything in Pragg's position is very nice. Literally, everything is defended by something else, except this rook, but nobody can really get to the rook right now. Rook is going to get aggressive, right? And Pragg is going to try to find a way to bully the white pieces, and then he's going to push his pawn forward, and white is no longer going to be able to defend. So right now, that's sort of happening. He's encroaching on both sides. Right, the h-pawn has walked up the board, it controls the g3 square, makes it difficult for Anish to move his pieces. Anish just sits back, but now the pawn gets closer and closer, right? And now the pawn is a real problem. Pawn's 1 square away from queening, which means black is either going to win this game or that pawn is going to fall and white is going to lose, all right? That pawn is nowhere near falling right now, and look at this. Tactics begin spinning. You get the pawn, but you're going to lose some material in the process, which is your rook. You get the knight, but you lose the rook. Now, Stockfish might be able to defend this with white because pawns are all on the same side, and if all the pawns get traded, this is probably a drawn endgame. The problem is black is not in the business of trading any pawns. Black is going to continue to try to hammer away at white's position and continue to bother him with the rook. And Anish is just defending here. I mean, he's doing his best, but we are already in the 60th move, so time pressure is there. The engine thinks, though, that this is holdable for white. It doesn't see a way in necessarily for black, but this is probably the way in. Getting an exchange, and after the exchange is done, the transformation of the position leaves black with this pawn, and potentially this liability for white. Pragg is going to do his very best. He gets that pawn for that pawn, but rook g5 comes in, and that's it. Once you lose g2, you're going to lose this pawn as well. This is a losing endgame because the king is unable to get back and defend. He's just actually cut off laterally. And so h3 happens, rook b2 happens, and that's it. This and this are both not preventable. And Anish Giri goes down. And the crazy thing is, Pragg is now perfect. He has won both matchups in Rapid. He's won $15,000. I'm pretty sure if you lose in Rapid, I think you get nothing. So Anish actually has 0 points, which is kind of nuts in the first 2 rounds. Now, admittedly, he played against Magnus. Okay, losing against Magnus is sort of like, you know, it's like, unfortunately, it's just kind of like, all right, well, what are you going to do? But he goes down to Pragg. We're going to have to see Anish bounce back. He's had a rough couple of opening rounds. And listen, I cheer for Anish. I like Anish, so I want him to do well. But yeah, Pragg is on a perfect 2 out of 2. The next matchup, which was very interesting, was this one. This actually went to the Blitz. This is the final Blitz game. They traded blows in the opening rounds. Both of them won in the Rapid games with Black. This was the final Blitz game. It's a Neo-Catalan to start, and Black plays d4, so White cannot play d4 himself. Now White is going to try to play like this, and Black is going to try to play c5, knight c6, e5, and so on. All right, let's see. Bishop, okay, or not. Not yet, but at some point you do have to start playing with your pawns. Okay, so it looks like this move might be delayed, but seems like that could be a potential plan. Oh my goodness. Duda's not letting him get anything. I mean, all right, here comes a3, knight goes back to c2, but it's very difficult to move here. All right, knight e4, but the bishop moves out of the way. Rook, all right, f5. You're still not letting him play b4. Now Black is the one calling the shots. Levon's like, I'm not so sure. Wait a minute. You sure you're calling the shots? Do you feel in control, like Bane said in Dark Knight Rises? All right, this bishop is now cut off. If you try to play the move b6 in this position, here's what I'm going to do. I might play b5, c6. Your bishop is now mummified, right? So he plays bishop e6. We have a trade. A lot of pawns fall off the board, but Levon's a pawn up, and he just defends against Duda's aggressions here. That pawn can fall, yes, but here's the problem. Look around the board. What is the worst piece in the position? If you said this bishop, you are correct, and here's the problem. I'm not sure how that bishop is ever getting into the game, because for it to get into the game, it has to move, the knight has to move, and the pawn has to come up. By the time that happens, White is going to do a lot of damage because this pawn might fall. You might trade off one of the active rooks. You might get in with your own rook. So how is this going to happen? All right, rook a1. Now you can't even move the knight. Okay, you played bishop b8. Now where are you going? Right, so b6. Here comes knight e5. Now here, Levon could have played b5. I actually don't exactly know why he didn't play this move. Maybe he liked something a little bit more about this approach. So this approach creates the threat of knight to d7 and knight to g6, right? Black plays king h7, but now you have knight c6. You also have c6 completely. This bishop is just legitimately never getting out. It's never getting out. It's in jail forever. Knight c6, and that's it. I mean, rook b8. One guy has a horse, the other guy doesn't. Like, if you just put 2 people side by side, just 2 regular people, and one of them has a horse next to him, I think he's a cooler guy. I think in life, that guy's got the advantage, right? So right now, you got 2 gentlemen, very nice guys, but one of them has a horse, the other one doesn't have a horse. And so my inclination is to give the advantage here to Levon, who just brings his king, and he picks off 1 pawn. He's going to get the 2nd pawn, and this is just the winning endgame because he literally just has a horse. Now, rook and knight, you should know, rook and knight versus rook is a draw. The pawns are the difference makers in this endgame, and it takes a little bit of time for him to consolidate, but at the end of the day, he will get the job done. He will push the black king back. He will make progress as a unit forward, because what black relies on here is repetition, and yeah, I mean, it takes 70-something moves, but progress has been made. The final pawn for black will fall, and this is why Duda resigns, because everything here is defended. This will collapse. Rook and knight versus rook is a draw, but rook, knight, and pawn, yeah, that's not a draw, because the pawn is always threatening to become a queen. So Levon wins in the blitz, and now Levon yesterday beat Liam, so now Levon has 5 points out of 6. Duda yesterday beat Hans Niemann, but today he loses to Levon in the blitz, so he gets 1 point for his efforts. The next matchup I have for you is this matchup between Firouzja and Liam. Both lost in the Rapid portion yesterday. This is their 3rd game of Rapid. And it begins with this line in the semi-Tarrasch that's extremely popular. If you followed my recaps at all in the past few months, you know that CD5, CD4 is just unbelievably popular. And there's a variation here where white can play bishop g5 or blow everything up with e4. And in this game, you do have this e4 move. Now you have pawn takes, a queen trade, knight g5. This defends against the fork. And instead of taking back the pawn on e4, white will do this and damage black's pawn structure. then play various developing moves and try to claim an advantage. Well, that doesn't quite happen in this game. There is no advantage. There is knight e4, and we have an exchange, right? Now, what if I told you, okay, that from this position, where white is 0.5, all right, a little slightly better position, that the game ends, it's a 30-move game. This is move 15. Both sides have now made 15 moves. So from this point forward to the end, we're already at the halfway mark. But how's that possible? It's totally equal. How did one guy lose this position that fast? We're about to find out. So, white plays king e2, which is a natural move because, you know, you want to bring the rook. Now, the rook is coming no matter what. You can play king d1 and prevent it, but then your rook is going to be stuck on this. Your king's going to be stuck in the center. That's not what you want. You're not really worried either about losing this pawn because rook b8. So you should know that the b pawn for both players is generally considered a poison pawn because it can activate the forces of the enemy very, very quickly and in a very unpleasant manner, right? So yeah, that's not something that either side really looks forward to. So instead of that, we have king e2. And we see the rooks. Now, the pawn does fall. There is no rook b8, but black plays this, and Firouzja is up a pawn for his efforts, right? He's up a pawn. Now, okay, this position is slightly better for black, despite being down one pawn. Now, think about that. A pawn is 1 point, but it's -1 for black. So it's actually a 2-point turnaround. It means that white's position is very difficult. It's very difficult because he has not gotten his development correct, and as you can see, he's being swarmed by rooks and potentially being swarmed by knights in a moment. So, a4. Here comes the knight, here comes the second knight. I mean, this just looks like bad news. Very tough to defend the position here. Now one pawn has been won back. And even though you trade one of the knights, it's just replaced. So really nothing has changed here. The knight is still there, and white is still desperately searching for a way of defense. But every chess position looks good until there's like a breaking point, right? So knight b2 is a fork, but here comes this move. You can't move the knight, right? You can't take because I would go here and your knight is actually trapped. So where's the knockout? Looks like black can't move, right? e5, okay. And, well, here's the knockout. It's actually incredibly difficult here to make a move. The knockout is that this position's totally brutal. Like, let's say white plays b4, okay? Black will play e4. Let's say white plays b5 to try to play b6. Black will play e3. What? How is he going to play? Well, just king takes. Yeah, then I'm going to take the rook with check. That's the problem. The problem is that back then you were going to take the rook, but the move e3 just wins the game for black because white is completely paralyzed. Like, let's say you play king e1 to try to get out of the way. Well, then I'm going to check you and win your rook. The problem is that it's a state of paralysis, but black has the domino that will tip over the whole position. And so Liam all of a sudden has to just go running. And here's another example where one guy has a horse and the other guy doesn't, so that makes that guy cool. And this one doesn't even go deep into the endgame. Liam just resigns. A super convincing win for Firouzja in 30 moves with black from a relatively innocuous opening. And he won the 4th game as well. So Firouzja bounces back yesterday from the defeat to Pragnananda. Liam's still 0 for 2, so he has the same score as Anish, but Firouzja is on the board with a win in the rapid portion. And those are our first 3 matches. Now, this was a fun match. And if you just decided to skip ahead here, as always in these recaps that feature Magnus playing, yesterday Magnus was victorious against Anish Giri. Yesterday, Hans Niemann was not successful against young Krzysztof Duda, and he had this kind of dramatic moment where Duda's laptop lost battery, and of course, only the organizers can be to blame for that. Well, today is a fun matchup, yeah? So, without further ado, we have a Rossalimo. So, normally Magnus is on the black side of a Rossalimo. And in this game, plays a little bit of a sideline in the sense that he delays this capture for a very long time. The knight goes back, attacking the bishop. Now the bishop takes. And white is, yeah, this is like some super, look at this. This is a super exotic way of playing the position. Black can take, but then he gets hit with this check. And this is just not what you want. You don't want all these dark squared liabilities. So instead, you literally just ignore the crazy person. Just ignore the crazy, you know, just, the knight's screaming, jumps, so it goes back. And then black's like, well, you can't castle. White's like, you can't castle. Black's like, whoever said I needed to castle, I don't need to castle. Knight here, we have a trade, queen d5. And now Hans is like, all right, you can push my queen back. That's absolutely fine with me. Now it's my turn. So I'm going to start pushing on the king side. I'm going to get my king to safety. King g8, king h7. My king is safe, and yeah, the attack is coming. The attack is coming, Magnus. Rook d7 consolidating. You can go ahead and see Magnus tries to get out here, and he's trying to poke create some problems here on potentially on the queen side, right? Bring the rook into the game, right? He brings the rook here. Hans rotates his queen, and suddenly it's becoming more and more unpleasant. The fact that Hans stabilized the center was super important in this game, because if you want to attack on one side of the board, especially when you're on the same side, like your king and their king is there, you want to stabilize the center. If the center is stable, it's very difficult for your opponent to create counterplay or even conjure up defenses. And watch as the moves just simply roll in naturally. G4, all right? Bishop f5. Magnus is trying to defend, but it seems like every move that gets played is just further encroaching into the position. And here comes the knockout blow. Even Magnus Carlsen himself is susceptible to being overwhelmed in a position, especially when the other side is playing exceptionally well. And bishop e4. Sometimes there are too many problems to handle. The rooks here bulldoze the d-file, so that square is completely not covered. And that's it. h3 is coming, bishop f4 is coming, bishop d3 is coming, bishop g2 is coming, queen takes rook is coming. Magnus plays a few more moves, but unfortunately the attack is too overwhelming. The position crashes and burns, and Hans Niemann beats Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces in 40 moves. 42, to be exact. What a win. This is a beautiful win, honestly. I wouldn't even be shocked if this is one of the best games that Hans has ever played. And so Hans stepped out, and the interviewer, they have this hallway interviewer, gentleman. I'm sure his title is much more significant than hallway interviewer. But he says, Hans, it was a terrible day for you yesterday. How is it like to bounce back with this masterpiece? And Hans just literally looks at him and goes, the chess speaks for itself. And just walked off into the distance. And the poor interviewer still tried to ask him a question because he wasn't prepared for that. He was like, is it special to do this against Magnus, Hans? And then he sticks out the microphone to the air. That was weird. You didn't have to do that. Once, it was a split second thing, you can watch the clip, but Hans was leaving and he still asked the question. I guess it was for dramatic effect. Wow, he's walking away and the question's being asked. Okay, so obviously Magnus is not getting directly trash talked here, but my God, I mean, Hans, that's a statement. Chess speaks for itself. I don't have to say anything. I'm gonna go walk off into the distance. Well, you beat Magnus with black. Let's see you put him away. Now you have the white pieces, Hans. The floor is yours. Your first win of the event is a dominant one with black over Magnus. Here we go. E4. Magnus goes back to the trusty French defense. He played this against the Nijgiri with success. We have a Tarrasch. We have this variation where black gets this kind of pawn blob, and Hans plays e5 early on in this game to push back the bishop. Magnus begins fighting back on the queen side, and we have this position where the light squared bishop for black is very nice. The dark squared bishop will have a purpose later on in the game, and we kind of see that happening right away. Bishop takes, and now bishop takes, and bishop takes, and queen c7. Queen c7 is a fork. So it attacks the bishop, and there's a threat over here, but obviously Hans's idea here was to take the knight. Now, what's funny is that despite material being totally the same, white has tactical problems here. The tactical problems are the fact that this is hanging, but believe it or not, this is also under attack. And what I mean by that is, if you play the move rook b1 in this position, this is under attack because queen h4, and oopsies, that's kind of tragic. And this. Now, one is more significant than the other, so you would have to lose this and run with the king, but there's tactical problems here. And Magnus immediately capitalizes on that and goes up a pawn. Now, if everything gets traded and just the bishops are left, this is a draw. In opposite colored bishop endgames, it does not matter if you're up one pawn. It just doesn't matter because the bishop would sacrifice itself for the pawn. Opposite colored bishops, you need more than that. You need at least a maybe 2-pawn advantage, or you need a way that you have more than one pawn remaining on the board. Or you just don't trade everything, right? And Magnus in this game consolidated his position, traded one rook, and proceeded to just ask questions. He traded queens, and he got to a rook and bishop endgame, like I just said. White has to defend here. Black does not want a rook trade, all right? Notice, look at this beautiful idea. Anchoring the rook in to target the f-pawn, you cannot take because rook f2 would be a devastating damage to the pawn structure. So we have this. And white is defending ultra passively here, allowing Magnus to effortlessly expand his position, right? This very nice idea to play g4 and just quickly anchor in the rook was probably overlooked by Hans. Also in this game, I think Magnus played every move within like 5 seconds. Like, Magnus legitimately got mad. I mean, I don't know about mad. He just probably wanted to bounce back. And I mean, it was all Magnus. He won multiple pawns. He left pieces just stranded on the edges of the board, like barely coordinating. And yeah, this is sort of probably what happens when Magnus gets pissed off. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I mean, he just played the game just effortlessly. Now, I would also imagine, like, this happens to me, I would not dare compare myself to Hans Niemann in chess quality. Obviously, he's leaps and bounds beyond me, but sometimes in chess, you ever feel this way? You win a game and you're like super hype. You're like, and the next game you play is like a disaster. This sometimes happened to me in the I Am Not a GM Speed Chess Championship. Like, I would win a very intense game, you know, very emotionally draining, and the next game would just be a complete pandemonium. So, all right, he loses, but it's still 1-1, right? So in this game, Magnus says, I'm gonna play A3. I'll play A3. This is so rude. Because Magnus is like, all right, you know what? I respect his opening repertoire. So I'm gonna play A3, and now we're in a Queen's Gambit London, but White has played A3, which could be a useful tempo. The opening gets super weird here. So we have like a weird Queen's Gambit F3. And folks, don't play like this. I know Magnus Carlsen is doing it. He's the greatest player of all time. Don't play like this. You play like this, you're gonna lose in 10 moves. Magnus plays like this. You're gonna, I mean, look at what, like, is Magnus trying to create a little dragon here? Like a little origami dragon here? What is this? But sometimes he gets, you know, somehow he gets away with it. Knight F4. Actually, here, Stockfish really wanted Hans to take this. It wanted him to preserve this bishop and pressure this pawn. It actually really liked this position for black, but Hans decided to give away that bishop, which also makes sense because he's going to open up this. And now Magnus walked his king to G2. Mind you, he has played every move in like 5 seconds. I mean, he made a very diligent effort to, I think, tilt his opponent and play very fast, which kind of go hand in hand. Like, yeah, black is minus 0.7, but how? How is black minus 0.7? What, you want him to play G5, G4? That's what the engine wants. The engine actually doesn't even want G4. You know what the engine wants on the next move after G5? I'm not even joking. The engine wants King F8. I mean, you can't play moves like that. Nobody plays moves like that. Hans castles and then ends up playing E5, which seems like it makes sense. And the sides clash in the middle here. And this looks like, you know, that's it. The D4 pawn is going to get picked up. It looks like, you know, Hans has a very convincing position here. Knight D5, Queen D4. A trade, Rook B1, and, you know, we have a -1 situation, right? Rook FD8, Bishop D3, pressure is still being applied. Hans making all the right moves, and yet all of a sudden, Magnus is back in the game. Hans did not capitalize the way that he should have, apparently. We have a couple of exchanges, and now Magnus has the bishop pair, and a massive time advantage. And now he goes to B7. All right, and now he picks up a pawn. And somehow, from the depths of just the absolute nonsense of the position that was built, Magnus has a one point advantage. He just goes back to A6. Now it's just an endgame. You're no longer playing Magnus in an obscure opening structure. You're playing the guy in an endgame. We have 2 rooks in a minor pair piece, minor piece pair each. Bishop pair versus bishop knight, and Magnus has a pawn up. He's keeping his king more or less safe. He has a queenside majority. He's not letting Hans get the counterplay on the king side. The king is safe, bouncing around through these checks. All right, Rook E1. Look at this. Look at this. I mean, it's just the pressure is building and building and building. Rook E4. He's going to try to trade the rooks. All right, you give me a couple checks. Sacrifices the rook. Because if there is a fork. First of all, I'm going to take that and then fork you. And if you take it with with like this, then obviously I have bishop B4. And Magnus just trades off some pieces. And he has, like I said, the 2-on-1 on the queen side. Continues to bully the king to come forward. And I think here he had king G3, which also won on the spot. It put black in Zugzwang, which is a very interesting position there. But he just pushes his a-pawn all the way. And I mean, he makes it look so easy, right? He just makes it look so easy. Trades off the rooks. The knight is stuck protecting the pawn from advancing. The bishop goes over there, picks up a couple of pawns. Actually, he doesn't even pick up the second pawn. That just promotes. Magnus just won 2 games. I think Magnus spent like 5 minutes of clock time on 2 games. Something completely ridiculous. So it's now 2-1. The chess spoke for itself in the first game, but my God, is it speaking for itself in these next 2? It's just You don't want to play angry Magnus. You want to play Magnus that's relaxed, that doesn't expect anything. You know, that seems to be the one that you have the best chance of defeating. All right, Hans has one final game. All right, he's got white. He can bounce back. He can force a playoff. He plays a classical quiet system against the Peerd's defense. Magnus plays this e6 thing. He's been playing this a lot. I've never seen this move. I have to tell you, I've never seen this move. It seems also insanely counterintuitive. But again, if you see a 1200 play this move, you laugh at the 1200 and call them an idiot. If you see Magnus Carlsen playing e6, you go, oh, I wonder what the idea behind that move could be. Like, shut up, bro. Straight up. All right, nobody knows what the idea behind this move is. All right, when Magnus plays a move, only he knows the idea. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. The Stockfish probably knows the idea. Other top players know the idea. But like, really, nobody knows. What's the idea of e6? Why would you block your own bishop? No, because you're going to develop it that way. Okay. Hans plays e5. We have a trade, a queen trade. And then here's something funny happens. Hans plays the move knight b5, attacking the pawn on c7. Now, there are two ways of defending this move. Pinning the knight to the bishop so that this move comes with this and you're just losing a piece here. And this doesn't quite work because black would get too much material. Or after knight b5, playing the move knight a6. Now, knight a6 is very bad because after just a simple developing move, black is paralyzed. Very difficult. If you go c6, the knight gets in here, losing position. Magnus chooses bishop a6, which is the better of the two. But it turns out there's a move here that's just almost winning for black. Not winning, but it's just a6. You can let him take and the knight gets trapped. So a6 kicks the knight just back out to where it came from, and black just immediately takes over the initiative and wins this pawn. Now, Hans apparently told Magnus after the game about a6. Magnus didn't see it. Magnus played here. And Magnus was like, wow, that's kind of embarrassing that I missed that move. It's just such a funny move because you think you have to stop the threat. You think, right, so bishop a6 played, and now Magnus has to play a little bit of ugly passive defense. Hans here plays a very interesting idea. Look at this. He sacrifices his knight, but plays this very nice rook a7 move. If you take the rook, then this pawn is a problem. It's going to either take. If you move out of the way, then this is going to hang. So that's not any good. So Magnus has to give up the light squared bishop, and then this pawn. But here's the problem. Hans is in a very difficult position here. He has an exchange down, and he's trying to create winning chances for himself because he has to win the game. Like, if a draw doesn't mean anything here for him. And he tries his best, but Magnus plays cool, calm, and collected defense here. Bishop c5, all his pieces are nice and powerful. And Hans continues to come forward, but unfortunately the position is just running out of steam. Nice move here to deflect the bishop off the f2 pawn. It tries to stay back, but if you don't lose the f2 pawn, you're going to lose the b3 pawn. And it takes 31 moves, but Magnus gets the job done. A convincing 3-0 comeback after losing that first game. I still think that first game was probably the best game that, like, Hans... I mean, maybe Hans would disagree with me. Hans played a lot of interesting games. Hans was a robot that game. Just the Terminator. And then in these other three games, Magnus was like, yo, I got you. I'm going to show you how it's done. Yeah. So Hans, Liam, and Anish all haven't scored in their first two rounds. We're going to see them try to bounce back in rounds 3 and onward. Obviously cheering for them. And we have two guys up top, Magnus and Prague, 6 out of 6. Levon with 5 out of 6 after winning in the Blitz against Duda. Hopefully you're enjoying the recaps. And don't trash talk Magnus Carlsen. I'll see you for round number 3. Get out of here.